So let's talk about movies. Today we're talking about a film called Rumours, which is a comedy drama satire from directors Guy Maddin, Galen Johnson and Galen Johnson. Look who's here, it's Chris. Turned up like a bad penny.
Like a bad boy in my bad boy hat.
I'm surprised you made it, to be honest, because you had a late one last night. You were DJing, weren't you? You were doing that scratch, all that mixing and itching.
Obviously, someone of your age would say that, but I'm so much younger that I've got perpetual energy and I'm okay to stay up late. I know you have to be in bed early.
You're older than me. We talked about this on the last one.
It's a myth.
Who looks younger, though?
Come on. Look at the evidence. Look at the evidence.
I think the viewers will say it's... No, actually, it probably will be you. I'm not even going to go there because people will say it's you, and I'll be gutted. I look very pink today. Have you realised?
You do look very pink. It's that porno lighting you've got for your OnlyFans.
Right, so let's talk about Rumours then. It's a great cast. Cate Blanchett, Roy Dupuis, Nikki Amuka-Bird, Charles Dance, Alicia Vikander. Written and co-directed by Guy Maddin, Galen Johnson and Galen Johnson, who I think have collaborated in the past. Apparently the title is inspired by the Fleetwood Mac album that came out in the late 70s because of the emotional crises that are said to have accompanied its recording. Didn't know that.
Well, that was interesting. Thank you. I think... I think it's a really good setup for a film, I've got to say. You know, it's you on the news all the time. You're always, I think the G20 is on at the moment, is it? I don't even know. I don't watch the news. But like, there's always a G something on, isn't there? There's always like these slightly mysterious world leaders all getting together in these kind of glamorous destinations, talking about whatever it is they talk about. And from time to time, you kind of find yourself thinking, I wonder what it is that they're talking about. You know, what are they doing? You know, what do they do in their downtime? What do they like with each other? How are they?
And now we know. And now we know what they talk about.
At least we got a view from this film, because that's exactly what the setup is. These 7 leaders are all together at the German Chancellor's country residence, I think, and ostensibly to prepare a statement in response to something. But to be fair, I don't think that really matters, and I don't think they really care what it's about either. So you get this kind of diverse group of people, and as you say, like, amazing ensemble cast, really, really great cast. Although I know I tend to hang up on accents quite a lot. Charles Dance was meant to be American, and he sounded really English.
I thought that, but I think that was deliberate because it was actually in the script, wasn't it? There was a joke about him not speaking American, but we all know that Charles Dance is quite capable of doing other accents. So I think that was deliberate, although yes, that did throw me actually as well until I heard that and thought, okay, well maybe it's poking fun at...
Yeah, I mean, he's not Angela Lansbury, is he? He can act. So, you know...
Ouch, yes, let's not go there again, because that upset a few people last time.
So yeah, really, really good premise. Really enjoy the premise, really enjoy the kind of setup for it. But as these people are sort of gathered together, having their little summit and preparing this statement, they go out to this kind of gazebo thing overlooking this lake on the Chancellor's estate. So yeah, they're all there sort of preparing this little statement, and all these slightly weird things start to happen. And as that starts to happen, you start to go, oh, okay, that's a bit weird as well. And like a succession of these kind of weird things happen. People wander off and start having these kind of slightly strange experiences. I mean, I've got to say, I really like the actor that plays Sylvain, the French one. He's really funny. And he goes wandering off, and people get hurt and all sorts of weird things happen. And you start to learn about the kind of little infidelities and stuff that have been happening amongst them, and all these kind of like lies and deceit and all that kind of stuff. And that's all really, really interesting. And you, to be honest, once that's sort of all set up, you start thinking, don't you, as a viewer, you know, what is going to happen to these people? Now I know a little bit about them and I know the setup. These strange things keep happening. What's going to happen next? And then what happens next happens next.
Yeah. I don't think it's a plot spoiler to say this, because I think people have spoken about this. The press has talked about it as well. There are 2,000-year-old humans that have been discovered, and they're embalmed, aren't they, in the clay? And that's all part and parcel of where the plot does go. I think the cast is good. I mean, we've got Cate Blanchett as the German Chancellor. We've got Charles Dance, who, like you say, was President of the United States, even though he does clearly speak British. Nikki Amuka-Bird is the UK Prime Minister. So I think there are a lot of things that the writer's obviously poking fun at, which is quite amusing. I don't know whether the comedy always lands, though. Some of the jokes for me, I was kind of laughing inside but not out loud, but I don't know whether that's because I just think the comedy timing wasn't quite right, because I think the pacing is a bit all over the place with this.
Well, again, some of the humour was quite clever, and let's be honest, Phil, you can't always keep up with clever comedy.
Well, true. I'll accept that. That's very fair, I think. Very fair.
No, I am the first to admit that I am not the cleverest film viewer as well. That takes a lot to keep me up to date with what's going on. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's not a kind of belly laugh film. It is satirical, and actually, to be honest, I think it's got quite a wide reach, this film. It's trying to do quite a lot. I think you could have almost actually left out the satire-y sort of stuff and just made it about these weird presences, that the 2,000-year-old people and the kind of what happens to the group of world leaders as a consequence of coinciding with them. Or you could have made it a satire about G7, which is what I thought it was going to be, and leave out all the sort of 2,000-year-old bog people. But it's kind of trying to do a lot, It's kind of a satirical, horror-y, thrillery. I mean, it's actually slightly impossible to give it a tag, isn't it?
It is, because it's a real genre mix, isn't it? And I think maybe that's where the problem was, because you're right. I think maybe if it had maybe lost the satire, but I think that's the whole part of the writers. I think that's their humour. So I think it probably would work if it was just satire, maybe. But I guess that's the whole point of the story, without spoiling anything. The story is about politicians trying to ignore what's going on in the world, and obviously the planet is in dire straits. So I think that's why the satire was there. So I think probably the satire is the one thing that should have stayed. But the horror is really subtle. I mean, the horror really, yes, it is part and parcel of it, but it's not overplayed. So I don't know whether the horror needed to be more ramped up, because I don't think it is.
The conclusion of the film helps to make it make sense in a way. It's allegorical as a film, I think, and it's kind of, it's a lesson and it's an observation about what's going on, about world leaders and burying their heads in the sand and writing pointless statements about stuff rather than actually doing anything, or worrying about their affairs with each other.
Yeah, personal stuff, being a bit selfish.
Yeah, exactly. So it does make that point in the end, but I think you end up working quite hard as a viewer to get there. Really, you have to do a lot of mining yourself, I think. And again, I don't mind having to work for my free film that I got sent. Thank you very much. But it's
entertaining though. We shouldn't have to work too hard.
No, exactly.
It should be them doing all the work.
But part of it aren't they? I mean, I think we both, the elements. It's not like it's a film. It's not like it's a film of two halves where you enjoy one half and not the other half. I mean, there's stuff to enjoy all the way through it. I think it sounds like we both struggled a bit with its a sort of muddiness about it and a sort of lack of clarity.
Lots of clay.
Yeah.
No, that's a very good point, because I did struggle a lot, particularly in the last half. I mean, you mentioned before we started recording that you enjoyed the first part. I did as well, because I thought, this is going to be really interesting. But then I started to become very frustrated. I wasn't as engaged as I was in the first third. And also, going back to the comedy parts that didn't work, there's a really bizarre gag about an AI chatbot this program that was designed to catch paedophiles, which I didn't know whether that was... I mean, yes, again, it is satire. So the dark comedy elements of this are meant to make you question things I just thought it was a really odd gag.
Well, to be honest, the only reason that bit really seemed to exist was that whole sort of line about the chatbot was to get the G7 leaders back to the house, because they've all been down at the lake and having these adventures, in the woods and stuff. And basically it's a way of summoning them back to the house. It just seems like a really complex thing to do just to get them to go back to the house. And yes, okay, the way they respond to this chatbot, it's obviously something that they've devised in policy themselves as leaders, and it's now being sort of tested on them to some degree. So there's sort of interest in there, but it's a distraction, basically. You kind of think, okay, was that all about just trying to get them back to the house so that the conclusion of the film could happen? And actually, that's all it was for, really. So that was a really weird diversion for me. I didn't get it.
It was. And I thought, there were a lot of parts in the film where it did swing tonally. It went from one place to another, which, again, might have been the intention, but I didn't really go with it. It didn't flow for me. I don't know whether you noticed in the opening credits how thanks was given to a lot of people, particularly G7, for their cooperation and for their, participation, which I don't know whether that was an apology of sorts, because obviously, yeah, they are poking fun at people in that environment.
I tell you what, there wasn't an apology for, which there absolutely should have been. You and I, both knowing our 80s music, will have observed the use of a particular piece of music. They discover that there's a lake, basically, that they're by the side of this lake, and they need to travel to the other side to go and get help, basically. So there's a sort of one of those kind of rope boat things where you can navigate across. And when they first... are you smiling because you remember the song? Or just
I don't remember the song. No.
So they start to... It's all very misty and moody down there. It's all very Company of Wolves.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that.
And suddenly this kind of ambienty, sort of floaty, fluty sort of music starts. And you're like, I know this. What's this song? And then suddenly it's Clannad. And you're like, ooh, okay, wasn't expecting some Clannad.
Enya saves the day.
No apology for the use of Clannad in the film, and there should have been.
I mean, there are so many bizarre elements, which is going to be a big tick for a lot of people, because a lot of people will like that. I mean, I like oddness in films, but I just found it frustrating, really. But I don't know whether you've seen Don't Look Up. Do you remember Don't Look Up? That I think it was a Netflix film. It came out, Adam McKay's movie, which a lot of critics didn't like it, but it was, again, Cate Blanchett was in it. I think very similar story in the way that it's, you know, a political satire, and it's about politicians that aren't doing enough to combat this dying planet. And yeah, I thought that was more amusing, but I guess it was a very different film, because it wasn't so much an indie satire. It was a lot more commercial, I guess, in feel. I
mean, look, I'm conscious in talking about this now, and obviously the way I felt about the film afterwards, that maybe there's just something I'm just not getting here. And maybe, you know, like I say, I had this expectation it was going to be the setup was going to be about the satire about the G7 leaders, and you start to discover these things about their private lives and how they behaved and stuff. And that all becomes really interesting. And perhaps I was just quite into that to start with, and when other stuff started happening, I just felt that was a distraction. But perhaps the other side of the coin is that would have been okay as a short, but you kind of need to make a feature film. Some other stuff's got to happen. You can't just talk about 7 slightly bizarre world leaders and their personal habits for an hour and a half, can you? I mean,
yeah, because it was a lot of them walking through the forest, and I did kind of think it was going to go somewhere else, and it didn't. And maybe we're meant to feel that loneliness that they feel because they're isolated and there's no one else around, and you know, obviously that with what happens, that's the whole point, you know, that's to bring home that thought of, you know, people not doing enough. But I thought it was really baggy, and it frustrated me.
It was. There was one little moment I quite enjoyed where one of the characters posits this idea that they may, as leaders, all be representative of the nations that they represent as personalities, you know, and it would be the oldest trick in the book for the movie makers to write a very French man and a very Canadian woman, and, you know, to write them in sort of these cliches about their countries. But they talk about this as characters, about whether they represent their people, both in terms of political representation, but in kind of cultural representation. Are they manifestations of their people? And at that moment, you start to go, oh, yeah, okay, is there a hapless Frenchman in here? Because that's the cliche. And is there a slightly, I can't think of the correct adjective, but the Italian leader, you know, is he like that? Because that's the caricature of Italian people. And again, it would have been a bit lazy if it had just been 7 cliche people. I don't think it was, but they start to talk about that. And again, it's something that kind of is posited and it's kind of out there and then not really followed through. It's not really, the characters aren't like that, and it just doesn't really deliver on that level.
Yeah, it's almost like it's an in-joke. I think that's what frustrated me in a lot of it, because especially with the humour, the writing, I thought it did seem a bit smug.
Which would, to be fair, would be the right way to make a film like this, because that world can appear very smug and exclusive to the rest of us. So maybe that will be the way to deliver it. But you can't, a satire, you really want to get under the skin of that. You know, you really want that to explore those things and to pull them apart a bit. And if that was the intent, you know, to reflect the smugness of the kind of operation, then it didn't do that.
Verdict then. Do you want me to go first? Because I know you complain when you're always the first one to decide where we go.
I'm going to ask you to go first, because actually I haven't thought very hard about what my score is. So I'd be interested to hear your score and your argument, because I'm sure it'll help me come to a conclusion. Okay,
I'm going for 2, and that's Saved by the cast. I thought they did a really good job with what they had. it tested my patience. I became frustrated by it. I think it was, baggy, and I didn't think the jokes were always landing properly, and I thought there was a lot of room in there for tightness. I don't just mean the running time, because I mean the running time is what, an hour and 45, isn't it? I became bored by it eventually. And the ending, I guess it did make me think, but then I think I'd got to the point where I didn't care much, to be honest. So it was a bit too late to save.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to be slightly more charitable and give it a 3 on the basis that, it starts quite well and there are some great performances in it. I think Cate Blanchett's brilliant in it. I really like the casting. I really like the people. As ever, I'm not allowed to do a half. So I think what that does mean, though, is that I'm going to go 3 because, it did entertain me for a bit, and then it started to frustrate me and annoy me as well. But, I'm going to be charitable because it's Sunday and I've got my hat on, so I'm going to be slightly more forgiving.
Aren't you a good boy? Good boy. Fetch the stick. That's creepy. That is quite creepy. I'd say that part that's coming out of the edit. Or I might stay in, maybe for the bloopers.
Put it on your OnlyFans.
So Rumours is released in UK and Irish cinemas on the 6th of December. Certificate 15. Let us know what you think of it. Drop a comment down below. Chris is always available for film reviews if you want to show him the Company of Wolves extended Blu-ray.
Don't need to do that, thank you.